federal agencies, and anytime you can get consensus from 23 federal agencies, you have done an amazing job, so I want to thank my colleagues for agreeing with me on everything. But let me really quickly tell you what our priorities are. Evaluate successful financial education delivery, so some of the things that you heard Nick talking about. Identify optimal strategy combinations. Education alone isn't going to do it. Conduct longitudinal assessments, and we've heard that that's possible with some of the panel data today. Identify key measures of success, those metrics. Evaluate interactions between education and product design. Remember I said education alone isn't going to do it. Assess the impact of the business cycle. Explore the impacts of risks and financial shocks. Identify local, state, and federal scalable opportunities, and leverage synergies with other subject areas. If you just go to treasury.gov and search on 2012 research priorities, it will take you right to this. And we are encouraging funders to fund these priorities so that we can get researchers to research these priorities, because we all know that research is, goes where the money is. Okay. I need to issue the disclaimer that I am up here on my own behalf, not speaking on behalf of the Federal Reserve Board, Federal Reserve banks, or their staff. And what I want to do today is talk about, in terms of vulnerable populations, talk about who is vulnerable, what they need, and what are some strategies to meet their needs. We've seen some examples of vulnerable populations in these presentations. Certainly, immigrant populations and non-English speakers are vulnerable populations. Low-income employees, including, sad to say, our service members in the military, especially the low-grade E1, E2, E3, E4, the enlisted personnel, and their spouses who are often left stateside. We've heard about young people. We've heard about older persons who may have some cognitive impairments. I would encourage us to think about those folks near retirement. Our latest, if you haven't seen the results from the 2010 Survey of Consumer Finances, they were released last week. And gosh, guess what? Those of us who are really at the cusp of retirement are in trouble, because our retirement funds took an awful hit. And there's going to be some people who are going to have to make some really tough decisions about when and how to retire and under what circumstances. And we might consider those folks as actually vulnerable. I would also submit that young persons under 25 are vulnerable, because they're coming out of school right now with a lot of student loan debt. We know that. And we also know what the employment environment is for people young and inexperienced. And so when you start out your life, career, earnings pattern in this kind of deficiency mode, it's really hard to overcome that and make up the gains that those of us who have been blessed with a fairly robust career have benefited from. And so thinking about that younger cohort as vulnerable is just a thought I would like to plant in your head. Speaking of young people, I would also submit that young people are just simply inexperienced and naive. And there is a huge effort to, Nick mentioned the FAFSA form and getting FAFSA forms filled out. Helping people even understand some of the issues that they're facing the first time they are filling out a big form, a government-looking, threatening form. The first time they're filling out a loan application. How do you help people in those first encounters? Certainly, the low income and the poor are vulnerable. People with low social capital may be as vulnerable as people with low human capital. And we've also heard earlier today about disabled youth. I know that, I guess it was about a year ago, the Wisconsin Center sponsored a workshop here in town about victims of domestic violence. So you can think about a range of sort of who are the vulnerable and how might we target those different groups. And that leads me to thinking about the work of intermediaries and the point that was made about working with financial advisors, and that Ken said, you know, you can work one-on-one and you reach one-on-one, but when you work with the intermediaries, you have an opportunity to have a multiplier effect. So identifying who those intermediaries are that are working with the vulnerable. Okay, so that's who's vulnerable. And so what's needed? Well, I guess the question then becomes, what are the outcomes we're looking for? And now I go back to that metrics question of what are the outcomes we're looking for? Are we looking for reduced debt, building assets, better credit scores, higher net worths? Are we looking for confidence, satisfaction, that self-anchoring financial goal that David was talking about in his 401k, where you have the goal account and you sort of know what that account is and you know when you want it? You know, are we measuring people against their own self-anchoring goals? In a lot of the discussion today has been focused around retirement and working toward retirement, 401k kinds of things. But I would like us to think about, do people even have the rainy day fund, the emergency fund, so they don't have to dip into their 401k for retirement, for emergencies? Do they have a safe way to manage cash? For immigrants, that's really important. For the underbanked and unbanked, that's very important. I was in a week-long series of meetings last week that talked about using mobile devices and working with underbanked, and what kinds of opportunities there is in that space for helping people find safe ways to manage their cash. Is there a way for them simply to pay their bills on time so that they don't get late fees, they don't get dings on their credit report? Are there ways to save for medium-term goals as well as longer-term goals? And do they have a mechanism for that? And I guess another outcome, what is it that we're trying to have them do, is I think in part to feel in control, to know that they've got some way to grapple with this issue of, are they sort of in charge of their money, or is their money in charge of them? I would also ask us to think about, and it's been mentioned several times today, the role of employers in employment and income policies. Sometimes what we really, really need is just for people to have more income. And I know in a budget situation that we're in right now, that's hard to think about. But when I go back to my study of the military folks, and you know, when you're in E1 or in E2 and you're getting $16,000 a year, it's, you know, I'm amazed that you can manage at that, frankly. I would also encourage us to think about how important the role of benefits, especially health insurance, is in helping people manage their finances. And so one of the outcomes we might be looking for is making sure that there is, in fact, provision for health care. In terms of strategies to meet the needs of the vulnerable, certainly we've talked an awful lot today about education, but I want to go back to one of the priorities in the research priorities and talk about education as one of a suite of strategies that we need to employ. The idea that we do need regulation and protection, the idea that we do need advice and coaching. There are some once-in-a-lifetime decisions. So how would you like to take your pension plan out? Do you want a single life annuity or a joint life annuity? And it's not toothpaste. If you make the wrong choice, you can't just go back to the store and buy another brand. So, you know, I really want advisors at that point in my career. What is the right set of product mix, and what new products can be out there? And how can regulators help in that opportunity to develop and devise new, safe, positive products for people? So when we think about vulnerable audiences, I want us to consider who they are, what they need, and what is the suite of strategies that we need to meet their needs. So, and I finished in time. Ha.